Hi everyone. Welcome to Shirley's Strange Tales. I'm Shirley, your late-night companion for creepy stories. Today, we're going to talk about a unique and deeply disturbing cultural practice in Chinese history: foot binding, also known as the creation of the so-called 3-inch golden lotus. But before we dive into that, we need to go back to an even earlier phenomenon called the Yangzhou slender horses. The Yangzhou slender horses weren't actual horses. In ancient times, especially in the prosperous Jiangnan region around Yangzhou, wealthy merchants and officials developed a disturbing custom: they would raise young girls to be exceptionally thin and delicate, often forcing them to diet severely or even take medicines to stunt their growth, making them look fragile, like malnourished slender horses, hence the name. These girls were not only expected to stay extremely thin but also had to be trained in singing, dancing, poetry, calligraphy, and painting. The goal was to sell them to wealthy families, where they would serve as concubines, entertainers, or objects of pleasure for the elite. It was in this context that foot binding first appeared as part of training these slender horses. Small, tightly bound feet were considered symbols of delicacy, femininity, and grace, but they also carried a strong erotic element. Bound feet made girls walk in an unnatural, swaying manner, intentionally altering their posture to appeal to male desire. Over time, this practice, which began among the elite slender horses, spread to ordinary families, turning from a niche training method into a widespread social custom. By the Song dynasty, foot binding had become increasingly common. While scholars debate its exact origins, it's generally agreed that by then, it was a fashionable aesthetic in upper-class society. Daughters from wealthy families were expected to have bound feet to be considered proper and elegant, and ordinary families would follow suit, hoping their daughters could marry into better households. Foot binding had evolved from a training tool for slender horses into a societal trend. The 3-inch golden lotus: extreme pain and social control. By the Ming and Qing dynasties, foot binding had reached its full extreme. Girls often began the process at the age of 4 or 5. Their toes were bent under toward the sole and tightly bound with long cloth strips, forcing the bones to break and reshape. The pain was unbearable, and many children would cry until they fainted. Yet parents often hardened their hearts, believing this was necessary for their daughter's future. Over time, the feet would slowly deform into what was called the 3-inch golden lotus. These tiny feet were considered alluring by men, but for women, they were a lifetime of disability. Women could barely walk, often staggering, and endured constant pain in their bones and nerves. There was even a saying: a girl without a pair of golden lotuses is not considered beautiful. Ancient admirers didn't just appreciate the appearance, they developed bizarre ways to enjoy these feet. Some literati would pour wine into a woman's tiny shoes, calling them golden lotus cups, and pass them around at banquets as a combination of elegance and eroticism. Others even treated the feet as sexual objects in themselves. In short, this was complete bodily objectification and twisted fetishization. Why did people find these deformed feet beautiful? It was both aesthetic and a power issue. Men admired the swaying gait, seeing it as seductive. From a social control perspective, foot binding restricted women's mobility, making them dependent on their families and husbands, limiting independence. In other words, foot binding was both an aesthetic pursuit and a method of controlling female bodies and freedom. In the early Qing dynasty, authorities actually issued bans on foot binding, considering it cruel and harmful to social development. Strangely, the ban only made the practice more popular. Some scholars argue it became a form of cultural resistance. Manchu women didn't bind their feet, so Han women did, marking their identity. Foot binding thus penetrated every corner of society, becoming almost inescapable. Other scholars suggest a more strategic motive: by crippling women's mobility, the ruling class forced families to spend more resources supporting daughters who could not work, weakening Han's social competitiveness. This idea is reminiscent of practices in other societies. For example, during American slavery, some masters would amputate slaves' toes, preventing escape. Both practices share a logic: control a group by controlling their bodies. Whatever the motives, the victims were always women. Their lives were marked by pain, dependence, and restricted freedom. Foot binding not only caused physical disability but also shaped their sense of self around societal expectations. The impact lasted until the early 20th century. After the 1911 revolution, intellectuals in the New Culture movement advocated for liberating women's feet. Progressive families started unbinding their daughters, yet the practice persisted for decades, even into the 1950s in some remote areas. From foot binding to high heels, a modern echo. So why did societies repeatedly modify and control women's bodies? From Yangzhou slender horses to the 3-inch golden lotus, women's bodies were shaped over and over to meet male desires. But has this phenomenon truly disappeared today? Not entirely. Take high heels, for instance. Like foot binding, they alter the natural shape of the feet, forcing toes together and raising the heel, creating a swaying gait deemed sexy or elegant. High heels can also cause foot deformities, arch strain, and joint pressure, echoing the pain of bound feet. The difference is that today, women may choose to wear heels, but societal expectations subtly push them toward it. In this sense, high heels are a modern, softer version of foot binding. They no longer rely on violence or coercion, but fashion and aesthetic norms still constrain women's bodies. The swaying walk of a woman in heels is conceptually similar to a girl walking with her bound feet. Both meet societal expectations at the cost of bodily comfort. When we look back at Yangzhou slender horses and the 3-inch golden lotus, we're not just revisiting history. We're reflecting on a persistent global issue. Why are women's beauty and social approval often tied to pain and sacrifice? This is not just a Chinese problem, it's a challenge across cultures. Hopefully, one day, women's beauty can exist without suffering or compromise. That's all for today's episode of Shirley's Strange Tales. If you enjoy creepy stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm Shirley, see you next time with even more thrilling stories.